I never told my son I was wealthy. The night he invited me to dinner with his fiancée's family, I put on my oldest dress, tied my hair back, and stepped into a world where I was meant to be invisible. Marcus looked at me with that nervous, pleading expression, hoping I'd blend in. Not embarrass him, just play the part of the simple, struggling mother he'd described. Simone's parents sat at the head of the table, regal and cold, their eyes sweeping over me like I was a stain on the white tablecloth. Veronica's emerald dress sparkled under the lights, her jewels catching every eye in the room. Franklin barely nodded, his watch glinting as he checked the time, already bored. Simone greeted me with a kiss that never touched her eyes. Her voice clipped and formal. "Mother-in-law, it's nice to see you." But her eyes said, "Don't ruin this." I sat quietly, answering their questions with the humility they expected. I let them believe I was poor, naive, nothing special. I watched as they toasted to new beginnings, their eyes never meeting mine, their laughter brittle and cold. Marcus looked away, embarrassed by the mother who didn't fit in. But as I sat there, enduring their whispers and their pity, I felt something shift inside me. They thought I was invisible. They thought I was nothing. They had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of. What happened that night would devastate my daughter-in-law's family in ways they never imagined. And trust me, they deserved it. Let me explain how I got there. Let me tell you who I really am, because the truth about Marcus's mother was about to shock everyone in that room. The truth is, my story didn't begin in that glittering restaurant, or even with Marcus's engagement. It began decades earlier, in a cramped apartment where I learned the value of hard work, quiet sacrifice, and the power of keeping secrets. Long before anyone called me simple, I was building a life no one could see. Back then, I was just Miriam, wife, mother, and after my husband's sudden illness, a widow before I turned 40. Daniel was only 10 when his father died. I remember the way he clung to me at the funeral, his small hand gripping mine so tightly I thought I'd never breathe again. I promised him that day I would never let him feel alone, that I would give him everything I could, even if it meant giving up everything I wanted. We didn't have much, but our home was filled with warmth. I worked long hours, first as a secretary, then as an office manager, and finally, after years of night classes and quiet ambition, as a senior executive. But I never brought my work home. At home, I was just mom. I made pancakes on Sundays, helped with science projects, and cheered at every soccer game, rain or shine. Daniel grew up believing that love was measured in time spent, not money earned. Our apartment was small, but it was ours. The furniture was old but comfortable, the walls covered in Daniel's drawings and school awards. We celebrated every birthday with homemade cake and laughter, and every holiday with traditions that belonged to just the two of us. I taught Daniel to be kind, to work hard, to never look down on anyone. I told him that dignity was something you carried inside, not something you wore on your sleeve. When Daniel left for college, I felt both pride and a deep, aching loneliness. He was the first in our family to go, and I sent him off with a suitcase full of clean clothes and a heart full of hope. I never told him about the scholarships I'd fought for, the extra shifts I'd taken, or the nights I'd spent worrying about bills. He didn't need to know. My job was to make his world bigger, not burden him with the weight of mine. After college, Daniel's world did grow. He landed a job at a prestigious firm, made friends with people whose lives seemed to revolve around parties and privilege. When he brought Simone home for the first time, I saw the way he looked at her, like she was a door to a world he'd only glimpsed from the outside. Simone was beautiful, confident, and used to getting her way. Her family was wealthy, their lives a blur of travel, art, and elegant dinners. I welcomed her with open arms, hoping she would see the value in the life Daniel and I had built. At first, things were good. Simone was polite, if a little distant. She complimented my cooking, laughed at Daniel's childhood stories, and brought expensive wine to dinner. But as their relationship deepened, I felt the ground begin to shift. Daniel started to change, subtle at first, then more pronounced. He stopped calling as often, stopped asking for advice. He started talking about fitting in, about how Simone's parents expected certain things, about how he didn't want to embarrass her. I tried to understand. I told myself it was just growing pains, that every family had to adjust. But the invitations to family gatherings became less frequent. When I did see Daniel, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone, always eager to get back to Simone's world. I watched as the traditions we'd built together faded, replaced by new ones that didn't include me. The first time I met Simone's parents, I wore my best dress and brought a homemade pie. Veronica greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and Franklin shook my hand like he was closing a business deal. The conversation was polite but distant, full of talk about investments and travel, things I had no part in. I felt invisible, a relic from a life Daniel was trying to leave behind. Still, I tried to hold on. I sent cards on birthdays, called every Sunday, and offered to help with the wedding planning, but my suggestions were brushed aside. My calls returned less and less. I watched as Daniel slipped further away, as Simone's family became the center of his world. I told myself it was natural, that children grow up and move on, but the ache in my chest never faded. There were things about Miriam's past that no one in the room could have guessed. They didn't know about the nights I spent poring over contracts, the deals I closed, the fortune I built in silence. They didn't know that every penny I saved was for Daniel, that every sacrifice was made so he could have choices I never did. They saw only what they wanted to see, a simple woman, unremarkable, easy to dismiss. But as I watched Daniel drift further away, I realized that love alone wasn't enough to keep a family together. Respect mattered, too, and as I stood on the edge of his new world, I wondered how much more I would have to give up before I disappeared completely. Now, as I return to the present, I steel myself for the days ahead and the mounting pressure from Simone's family. I know the woman they see is not the woman I am, and I know that sooner or later the truth will come out, whether they're ready for it or not. Now, as I return to the present, I steel myself for the days ahead and the mounting pressure from Simone's family. I know the woman they see is not the woman I am, and I know that sooner or later the truth will come out, whether they're ready for it or not. It was a week after the engagement party when I found myself standing in the hallway outside Simone's parents' apartment, waiting for Daniel to finish a phone call. I'd come to drop off a small gift for Simone, a set of embroidered napkins I'd made by hand, a tradition in my family. The door was ajar and I could hear voices drifting from the living room. I paused, not wanting to interrupt, but then I heard my name. "She's sweet, but she's not our kind of people," Veronica was saying, her voice low and sharp. "I don't want her at the head table. In fact, I think it's best if she keeps her distance at the wedding. We can't have her embarrassing us in front of our friends." Franklin's voice was even colder. "Marcus is a good man, but he's too attached to his mother. If he wants to move up in the world, he needs to cut the cord. Status matters, Simone. You know that. We can't have him dragging around a mother who looks like she shops at thrift stores." Simone's reply was a whisper, but I heard every word. "I know, Dad. I've talked to Marcus. He says he understands, but he's stubborn. I'll keep working on him. I want our wedding to be perfect. I want our life to be perfect." I stood frozen, the gift trembling in my hands. I felt the sting of their words like a slap, each one stripping away another layer of hope. I had always known I was an outsider in their world, but I never imagined they would try to erase me from my own son's life. I pressed my back against the wall, willing myself not to cry, not to make a sound. A few minutes later, Daniel appeared in the hallway, his face flushed, his eyes darting away from mine. "Mom, you're early," he said, forcing a smile. "Simone's parents are just finishing up a call. Why don't we go for a walk?" I handed him the napkins, my hands shaking. "I heard what they said, Daniel. About the wedding. About me." He looked away, shame flickering across his face. "Mom, it's not what you think. They want everything to be perfect. They're worried about appearances. It's complicated." I searched his face for the boy I'd raised, the boy who used to beg me to stay at his soccer games, who used to call me his hero. "Is it complicated, Daniel? Or is it just easier to let them decide who matters and who doesn't?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the floor, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I just want everyone to get along. I don't want to fight with Simone. I don't want to make things harder." The pain in my chest was sharp, but beneath it, something else began to stir. a quiet, simmering resolve. I realized then that I was not just fighting for a seat at a table. I was fighting for my place in my son's life, for the dignity I had earned through years of sacrifice and love. That night I lay awake, replaying every word I'd overheard. I thought about all the times I'd put Daniel first, all the dreams I'd set aside so he could have a better life. I thought about the woman I had become, the woman they refused to see. I knew I couldn't force Daniel to choose me over Simone, but I could refuse to let them erase me. Could Miriam protect her son and her dignity from those who wanted to erase her? The question echoed in my mind as I watched the city lights flicker outside my window. I decided, quietly and firmly, that I would not go down without a fight. I would find out what Simone's family was really after, and I would protect Daniel, even if he didn't know he needed protecting. With a new sense of purpose, I began to pay closer attention, to listen more carefully, to watch for the cracks in their perfect facade. I would not let them take my son from me, and I would not let them decide my worth. The days after that hallway conversation were some of the loneliest of my life. I went through the motions, work, errands, polite phone calls with Daniel, but inside, I was unraveling. Every time I heard my phone buzz, I hoped it would be Daniel calling to apologize, to say he'd stood up for me. But the calls were always short, distracted, full of reassurances that Simone's parents just want what's best for everyone, and it's only for the wedding. Mom, don't take it personally. I tried to believe him, but the ache in my chest only grew. Simone's family became bolder in their exclusion. Veronica sent out wedding planning emails to everyone but me. When I offered to help with the invitations, Simone smiled tightly and said, "We've got it covered, Miriam. You can just relax and enjoy the day." At the engagement brunch, I was seated at the far end of the table, next to a distant cousin who barely spoke English. I watched as Simone's parents toasted to family unity, their glasses raised high, their eyes never meeting mine. Daniel, caught in the middle, grew more distant. He stopped coming by for Sunday dinners, always with an excuse: work, errands, wedding planning. When he did visit, he seemed distracted, his phone always within reach, his eyes flickering with guilt. I tried to reach him, to remind him of the bond we'd shared, but he was slipping away, one polite conversation at a time. At night, I lay awake, replaying the past. I remembered the years after Daniel's father died, the way I'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, the nights I'd stayed up sewing costumes for school plays, the mornings I'd woken early to make his favorite pancakes. I remembered the pride in his eyes when he brought home his first report card, the way he'd hug me tight and whisper, "We're a team. Mom!" I wondered when we'd stopped being a team, but even as my heart broke, something inside me hardened. I began to watch Simone's family more closely, to listen for the things they didn't say. I noticed how Veronica always steered conversations away from her own past, how Franklin bristled at any mention of business setbacks. I saw the way Simone's smile faltered when her parents argued in hushed tones, the way she clung to Daniel's arm a little too tightly at family gatherings. One afternoon, I stopped by Daniel and Simone's apartment to drop off a casserole. Simone answered the door, her face pinched with annoyance. "Oh, Miriam, you didn't have to do that," she said, barely glancing at the dish. I stepped inside and noticed a stack of unopened bills on the counter, all addressed to Simone. She quickly swept them into a drawer, her smile brittle. "We're just a little behind on things. Wedding planning is expensive, you know." I nodded, but my mind was racing. Later, as I walked home, I remembered the way Simone's parents had boasted about their wealth, the way they'd dismissed my simple life. If they were so comfortable, why was Simone struggling to pay her bills? Why did Franklin always change the subject when someone mentioned his company? The questions gnawed at me, fueling a quiet determination to find the truth. Flashbacks came to me in waves, moments I'd buried in the rush of daily life. I remembered the time Daniel broke his arm, and I spent the night in a hard plastic chair at the hospital, holding his hand until the pain faded. I remembered the Christmas when I couldn't afford a tree, so I made one out of green construction paper and taped it to the wall. Daniel had loved it, decorating it with paper stars and laughing as we sang carols off-key. I remembered the sacrifices, the small victories, the way I'd built a life out of nothing but love and grit. Now, I drew on that strength. I started keeping a journal, jotting down every odd detail, every whispered conversation, every time Simone's family contradicted themselves. I reached out to an old friend, a retired accountant, and asked her to help me understand the bills I'd seen. She agreed, and together we began to piece together a picture of Simone's family that didn't match the one they presented to the world. The more I learned, the more unsettled I became. There were rumors of failed investments, lawsuits quietly settled, a business deal gone wrong in another country. Veronica's jewelry, once the talk of every party, was suddenly missing from her wrists. Franklin's car, always new and gleaming, was replaced by an older model. I realized that the family who had looked down on me for my simple life was hiding troubles of their own. But as Miriam dug deeper, she uncovered a secret that changed everything. The more I uncovered, the more the cracks in Simone's family began to show. My friend, the accountant, Ruth, pored over the bills and statements I'd quietly gathered. "Miriam, these aren't just late payments. There are liens, collection notices, even a foreclosure warning on a property in Franklin's name." I felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. The people who had dismissed me as unworthy were themselves teetering on the edge of ruin. At the next family dinner, the tension was palpable. Veronica's smile was tighter than ever, her laughter brittle. Franklin barely spoke, his eyes darting to his phone every few minutes. Simone seemed distracted, her fingers twisting her napkin into knots. Daniel tried to keep the conversation light, but every topic seemed to circle back to money, honeymoon plans, the cost of the venue, the price of flowers. I watched as Simone's parents exchanged worried glances, their facades slipping with every passing minute. After dinner, I lingered in the kitchen, helping Simone with the dishes. She was quiet, her movements mechanical. "Is everything all right?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. "It's just, my parents are under a lot of stress. Dad's business isn't doing well. They don't want anyone to know." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They're counting on this wedding to help them save face. They want everything to look perfect." I nodded, understanding more than she realized. I remembered the years I'd spent hiding my own struggles, putting on a brave face for Daniel, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I wanted to comfort Simone, to tell her that appearances weren't everything, but I knew she wouldn't hear it, not yet. The next day, Daniel called. "Mom, Simone's parents are asking if you can help with some of the wedding expenses. Just a little, to cover the deposit for the venue." His voice was hesitant, almost ashamed. "I know you don't have much, but they said every bit helps." I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my tone calm. "Of course, Daniel. I'll see what I can do." I hung up and sat in silence, the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. They saw me as a source of pity, a last resort. Never suspecting the truth, that night I lay awake, thinking of all the times I'd been underestimated, all the times I'd let others believe I was less than I was. I thought of the sacrifices I'd made, the fortune I'd built in silence, the power I'd wielded without ever raising my voice. I realized that I was done hiding. I was done letting others define my worth. But as Miriam dug deeper, she uncovered a secret that changed everything. Ruth found a series of wire transfers from Franklin's business to an offshore account, money that had vanished just before the company went under. There were emails between Veronica and a lawyer discussing a possible bankruptcy filing. The family that had looked down on me for my simple life was on the verge of losing everything. I stared at the evidence, my heart pounding. I knew I had a choice to make. I could expose them, shatter the illusion they'd worked so hard to maintain, or I could keep their secret and let them continue to treat me as less than. The decision weighed heavily on me, but I knew I couldn't ignore the truth. Miriam discovers undeniable proof of the in-laws' hypocrisy and must decide what to do. The evidence was undeniable. Ruth and I sat at her kitchen table, the documents spread out between us like a map of someone else's disaster. There were bank statements showing massive withdrawals, legal letters stamped urgent, and a string of emails between Franklin and a lawyer in another country. The story was clear. Simone's parents were not just struggling, they were on the brink of financial ruin, hiding it behind a wall of luxury and pride. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. Veronica and Franklin had spent years building their reputation, hosting lavish parties, sending Simone to the best schools, and now it was all about to collapse. The wedding, the show of wealth, the endless talk of status, it was all a desperate attempt to keep up appearances. I thought of the way they'd looked at me, the way they'd dismissed me as simple, and felt a surge of anger. But beneath it was something else, a deep, aching sadness for Daniel, who had no idea what he was marrying into. The next day, I watched Simone and Daniel as they toured a wedding venue. Simone was radiant, her laughter echoing through the empty hall, but I saw the tension in her eyes, the way she clung to Daniel's arm. Franklin and Veronica trailed behind, whispering urgently, their faces tight with worry. I wondered if Daniel noticed, if he saw the cracks in the perfect picture Simone's family tried so hard to paint. That evening, Daniel called me. "Mom, Simone's parents are asking if you can help with the wedding. They said you might have some savings." His voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "I know it's a lot, but they're under so much pressure. I just want everything to go smoothly." I wanted to scream, to tell him the truth, but I held back. "Of course, Daniel. I'll see what I can do." I hung up and sat in the quiet, the weight of the secret pressing down on me. I thought of all the years I'd spent protecting Daniel, all the sacrifices I'd made so he could have a better life. Now I was faced with a choice: expose Simone's family and risk breaking Daniel's heart, or stay silent and let them continue their charade. I remembered the look on Daniel's face when he was a boy, the way he'd run to me after a bad day, the way he'd trusted me to make everything right. I wanted to protect him from pain, but I also knew that shielding him from the truth would only hurt him more in the end. I was torn between justice and mercy, between the urge to reveal everything and the fear of what it would do to my son. Late that night, I sat with Ruth, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "What should I do?" I whispered. "If I tell Daniel, it will destroy him. But if I don't, he'll be trapped in a lie for the rest of his life." Ruth was quiet for a long time. "You can't protect him from everything, Miriam. He's a man now. He deserves to know the truth, even if it hurts. But you don't have to do it alone. Gather everything, be sure. And when the time comes, trust that you raised him to be strong." Miriam realized she was in over her head, but she couldn't turn back now. The secret was too big, the stakes too high. I decided to quietly gather more evidence, to document everything, and to seek advice from Ruth and a few trusted friends. I owed it to Daniel to be certain, to be careful, to be ready for whatever came next. Ruth's advice echoed in my mind as I walked home that night, the city lights blurring through my tears. I knew she was right. Daniel deserved the truth, even if it shattered the world he thought he knew. But the thought of being the one to break his heart filled me with dread. I spent the next morning in a fog, barely tasting my coffee, my mind racing with questions and fears. How much should I tell him? How could I prove what I'd found? And what if Simone's family found out what I was doing before I was ready? I called Ruth again, my voice trembling. "I need help, real help. I can't do this alone." She didn't hesitate. "Come over. Bring everything." Ruth's living room became our war room. She spread out the documents, highlighting key details, making copies, and organizing everything into a binder. "If this goes to court, you'll need a clear record. And if they try to intimidate you, you'll have proof." Ruth's calm, methodical approach steadied me. She'd spent her career as a social worker, helping families through crises, and her wisdom was a lifeline. "You're not just protecting Daniel," she reminded me. "You're protecting yourself. You're protecting your dignity. Don't let them bully you into silence." Meanwhile, the in-laws' behavior grew more reckless. Veronica began making extravagant purchases again, designer clothes, expensive jewelry, a new car that appeared in their driveway one morning. Franklin started boasting about a big deal that would solve all their problems, but I noticed the way his hands shook when he thought no one was looking. Simone, caught in the middle, became more anxious, snapping at Daniel over small things, her laughter brittle and forced. Daniel, for his part, was torn. He wanted to believe in Simone's family, to trust that everything would work out. But I could see the doubt in his eyes, the way he hesitated before answering their calls. the way he clung to me a little longer when we hugged goodbye. He started asking questions about money, about the wedding, about why Simone's parents seemed so desperate for everything to be perfect. I answered as honestly as I could, careful not to reveal too much too soon. The cat-and-mouse game intensified. I began to notice small things, Veronica watching me from across the room, Franklin making veiled comments about people who don't know their place. I kept my journal hidden, my phone locked, my conversations with Ruth discreet. I started recording meetings, saving emails, and documenting every interaction. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became. I was no longer just a mother trying to fit in. I was a woman fighting for her son, for her dignity, for the truth. But the guilt gnawed at me. I hated the secrecy, the lies, the feeling that I was betraying Daniel by not telling him everything. I worried that I was becoming the very thing I despised, someone who hid the truth for the sake of appearances. Ruth reassured me, "You're not hiding the truth. You're protecting him until you have all the facts. When the time comes, you'll know what to do." As the wedding approached, the pressure mounted. Simone's family became more demanding, insisting on lavish upgrades to the venue, pushing Daniel to take out loans, and hinting that I should contribute more if I wanted to be included. I smiled politely, agreeing to whatever they asked, all the while documenting every request, every transaction, every lie. One afternoon, I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You're not the only one watching." The message was short. "Be careful, Miriam. Some secrets are better left buried." My hands shook as I read it, fear prickling down my spine. I showed it to Ruth, who frowned. "They're getting nervous. That means you're close. Don't back down now." But just as Miriam thought she had everything under control, the in-laws made a move she never expected. Veronica confronted me at a family dinner, her voice icy and controlled. "Miriam, I know what you've been doing. I know you've been digging into our business. If you care about your son, you'll stop, now." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I felt the weight of every secret, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt pressing down on me. I looked at Daniel, at the confusion and fear in his eyes, and realized that the confrontation I'd been dreading was finally here. There was no turning back. The silence after Veronica's accusation was so sharp it seemed to slice through the air. I could feel every eye in the room on me, Daniel's confusion, Simone's panic, Franklin's cold calculation. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "You're right, Veronica. I've been looking into your business. I had to for Daniel's sake, for my own." Veronica's lips curled into a sneer. "How dare you? You come into our family, snooping, spreading lies." "I haven't lied," I said, my hands trembling, but my resolve hardening. "But you have. To Daniel, to Simone, to everyone here. You've built your life on secrets and appearances, and now you expect my son to pay the price for your mistakes." Franklin slammed his hand on the table. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're just jealous because you never had what we have." I met his gaze, refusing to look away. "What you have is debt, lawsuits, and a reputation built on sand. I know about the offshore accounts, the foreclosure, the bankruptcy filings. I know you've been pressuring Daniel to take out loans, to cover your tracks. And I know you've tried to push me out because you thought I was too simple to notice." Simone's face went pale. "Mom, Dad, is this true?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Veronica's mask slipped for a moment, her eyes darting to Franklin. "We did what we had to do. For you, Simone. For the family." Daniel looked at me, his voice shaking. "Mom, what's going on? What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every secret I'd carried for years. "Daniel, I haven't been honest with you either. I let you believe I was just a secretary, just a woman scraping by. But that was my choice. I wanted you to grow up humble, to know the value of hard work. The truth is, I've been a senior executive for almost 20 years. I make more in a month than most people do in a year. I never told you because I wanted you to be proud of who you are, not what you have." The room erupted. Franklin shouted, "You're lying. You're just trying to turn them against us." Simone burst into tears, her hands covering her face. Daniel stared at me, stunned. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I swallowed hard, my own eyes burning. "Because I wanted you to be your own man. I wanted you to choose your life, not chase after someone else's. But I can't stand by and watch you be used. Not by anyone. Veronica's anger turned desperate. You think you're better than us? You think you can just waltz in here and ruin everything? I shook my head. No, Veronica. I think you did that all by yourself. I just refuse to let you do it to my son. Franklin stood, his fists clenched. You have no proof. You're just bitter. I reached into my bag and pulled out the binder Ruth and I had prepared. Here's the proof. Bank statements, legal documents, emails, everything you've tried to hide. If you want to contest it, we can do it in court. But I think you know how that will end, Simone sobbed, her voice breaking. Why, Mom? Why didn't you just tell us the truth? Veronica's voice was cold. Because you wouldn't have understood. Because you needed to believe we were perfect. Daniel looked at me, his eyes full of pain and confusion. Mom, I don't know what to say. I reached for his hand. You don't have to say anything. Just know that I love you. I always have. And I always will. The confrontation left the family raw and exposed. Accusations flew, Franklin blaming Veronica, Simone blaming her parents, Daniel blaming himself. I stood my ground, refusing to let guilt or fear silence me. For the first time in years, I felt free from the burden of secrets, free from the need to prove myself to anyone. But the fallout from this confrontation would change everything, for better or worse. As the dust settled, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The truth was out, and now we all had to face the consequences. The days after the confrontation felt like living in the aftermath of a storm. The truth once spoken could not be unsaid. Simone's family was forced to face the consequences of their deception. Franklin's business partners, already suspicious, quickly learned of the bankruptcy filings and offshore accounts. The news spread through their social circles like wildfire. Invitations dried up. Veronica's phone, once buzzing with calls from friends and admirers, now sat silent on the kitchen counter. The family's carefully constructed image of wealth and power crumbled in a matter of weeks. Legal troubles followed swiftly. Franklin was summoned to court to answer for his financial misdeeds. Veronica, who had always prided herself on her reputation, found herself shunned by the very people she'd tried so hard to impress. Simone, caught between loyalty to her parents and her love for Daniel, withdrew into herself. She stopped returning my calls, and when I saw her, her eyes were red from crying. The wedding was postponed indefinitely. The plans for a grand celebration replaced by tense family meetings and whispered arguments behind closed doors. Daniel was left standing in the ruins, forced to choose between the family he'd hoped to join and the mother he'd always taken for granted. For days he barely spoke to me, his face drawn and haunted. I gave him space, knowing that he needed time to process everything. I spent long hours walking the city, thinking about the choices I'd made, the secrets I'd kept, and the pain I'd caused by finally telling the truth. One evening, Daniel showed up at my door. He looked older, more tired than I'd ever seen him. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have seen what was happening." He sat at my kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and for the first time in years, he let himself be vulnerable. I thought I was protecting Simone. I thought I was building a future, but I was just running from the past. I reached across the table and took his hand. "You don't have to run anymore, Daniel. You just have to be honest with yourself, with the people you love. That's the only way to move forward," Simone called a few days later. Her voice was small, almost childlike. "I'm sorry, Miriam. I didn't know how bad things were. I didn't want to believe it." I listened, my heart aching for her, for the girl who had been raised to believe that appearances mattered more than truth. "You're welcome here, Simone," I told her. "But you have to decide what kind of life you want. You can't build it on lies." The family began to heal, but not without scars. Franklin faced legal consequences, and Veronica retreated from public life, her pride wounded, but her spirit unbroken. Simone and Daniel started counseling, determined to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty. I joined them for a few sessions, sharing my own fears and hopes, my regrets and my dreams. It wasn't easy. There were days when the old wounds reopened, when anger and grief threatened to pull us apart. But there were also moments of grace, quiet dinners, shared laughter, the slow return of trust. I found myself reflecting on forgiveness. Could I truly forgive Simone's family for what they'd done? Could I forgive Daniel for his blindness, for the years he'd spent chasing someone else's approval? I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single act, but a process, a choice I had to make every day. Some days it came easily. Other days it felt impossible. But I kept trying, because I knew that holding on to anger would only poison what was left of our family. Justice had been served, but redemption was harder to find. I watched as Daniel struggled to rebuild his life, as Simone tried to make amends, as Franklin and Veronica faced the consequences of their actions. I saw the pain in their eyes, the regret in their voices, and I knew that we were all paying a price for the secrets we'd kept. But could Miriam ever truly trust her family again? The question lingered, a quiet ache beneath the surface. I wanted to believe that love was stronger than betrayal, that forgiveness could mend even the deepest wounds. I wanted to believe that the family I had fought so hard to protect could find its way back to each other. As the family started to rebuild, I found hope in the small things, a shared meal, a gentle word, the sound of Daniel's laughter. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, but I was ready to walk it, one step at a time, with my family by my side. The months that followed were quieter, but not empty. The storm had passed, but its mark remained, a scar, not a wound. Daniel and I found our way back to each other slowly, with awkward conversations and long walks through the city. Sometimes we talked about the past, about the choices we'd made, and the things we'd left unsaid. Sometimes we just walked in silence, letting the rhythm of our footsteps say what words could not. Simone joined us sometimes, her presence tentative but genuine. She apologized again and again, not just for her parents' actions, but for her own blindness. "I wanted so badly for everything to look perfect," she admitted one afternoon as we sat on a park bench watching children play. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting the people who loved me." I squeezed her hand, feeling the truth of her words settle between us. We all want to be seen, Simone. But sometimes we forget to look at the people right in front of us. Daniel and Simone worked hard to rebuild their relationship. They went to counseling, learned to talk honestly, and made new plans for a simpler wedding, one that included everyone, not just the people with the right clothes or the right bank account. I helped where I could, but I also learned to step back, to let them make their own choices, even their own mistakes. It was a new kind of love, one that respected boundaries and honored the lessons we'd all learned. I found peace in small rituals. I started visiting the old family home on Sunday mornings, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, letting the memories wash over me. I remembered the years when it was just Daniel and me, the laughter and the tears, the quiet strength that had carried us through. I realized that I was proud not just of what I'd accomplished, but of who I'd become. I had stood up for myself even when it meant standing alone. I had protected my son, not by shielding him from pain, but by trusting him to face the truth. One afternoon, as the sun set over the park, Daniel joined me on the bench. We watched the sky turn gold and pink, the city lights flickering on in the distance. "Thank you, Mom," he said quietly, "for everything, for not giving up on me, for being brave when I wasn't." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. "We're both braver than we think," I told him. "Sometimes it just takes a little push to remember." But what would you have done in Miriam's place? Would you have risked everything to protect your family, even if it meant facing painful truths? Would you have found the strength to stand up for yourself even when it felt impossible? These are the questions I still ask myself, even now, as I watch my family laugh and grow and forgive. The answers aren't easy. But as I walked home that evening, the city alive with possibility, I knew that I had done what I needed to do, not just for Daniel, but for myself. And in that, I found a new beginning. If you've listened to my story this far, thank you for sharing this journey with me. I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt invisible, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside by the people who should have known me best. Sometimes, the hardest battles we fight are the ones inside our own families. The ones where love and loyalty are tangled up with pride, fear, and the need to belong. Have you ever been underestimated or dismissed by your own family? Have you ever felt like your worth was measured by your clothes, your job, or your bank account, instead of your heart and your history? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have stayed silent to keep the peace, or would you have risked everything to stand up for yourself and the people you love? I know there's no easy answer. Every family is different, every story unique, but I hope my experience reminds you that your voice matters and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to speak your truth, even when it's hard. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between fitting in and being true to yourself? Did you ever have to reveal a side of yourself that others never expected? Please share your story in the comments below. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs right now. And if this story touched you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with a friend. Our community grows stronger with every voice, every lesson, every act of courage. And if you think this story was powerful, just wait until you hear what's coming next. In our next episode, we'll reveal another family secret, one that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and forgiveness. You won't want to miss it, so what would you have done in my place? I hope you'll join the conversation, because together we can find strength in our stories and hope in the truth. Thank you for listening, for caring, and for being part of this journey with me.